Okay, so this week we're going to move towards the justification aspect of knowledge. So remember, knowledge, the definition we're working with of knowledge, is justified true belief. Now, I kind of focused on Plato and Aristotle as examples of truth, right? Objective truth, subjective truth, those distinctions. And so truth isn't going away, but we are going to move and focus more specifically on the justification aspect. And again, that was there with Plato and Aristotle as well, right? For Aristotle, the senses are enough justification for the belief in truth, or truths, right? More precisely. For Plato, that's not enough justification, right? There's something else. For many, a good justification is logic. So we're going to focus on an introduction to logic this week. And if you're into this stuff, we teach an entire course on the introduction to logic. So feel free to take that. Many math majors have to end up taking logic courses as well, because there again, it's how mathematics works, not just that mathematics works, right? And so I need to clarify some terminology, because frequently out there in the world beyond a philosophy classroom, you might hear things like, that's a valid argument. And by that, what most people mean is it's a good or sound argument. Validity is a bit more precisely defined within the confines of philosophy. Validity is going to refer merely to the pattern of the argument. Is it ordered properly? Is it ordered in such a way that one piece of evidence leads to the next piece of evidence, which leads to the next piece of evidence, and eventually leads to the conclusion necessarily? Ta-da. Or is it kind of haphazard all over the place, and it doesn't actually lead to the next, to the next, to the next, in which case that's an invalid pattern of argument. And in order to have a good sound argument, you must have a valid pattern, okay? But that's not enough to just have a valid pattern. You also have to have true evidence, true premises, right? So it's true premises, true evidence, true pieces of information ordered in the right way, in a valid pattern, which then give you a good sound argument. And so in many ways, logic itself here is this combination of at least potentially subjective truths and objective truth, right? Whether the order is enough, whether the order is good or not, is objective, right? Either it leads to the next piece of evidence or it doesn't, the end. Truth, the truth of the premises, sometimes can be objective. Sometimes, as we saw with Aristotle, perhaps sometimes it's more subjective, okay? Which then is going to have ramifications for the overall argument. It's going to have ramifications for the justification part of knowledge, and by extension, then, the truth as well. So, notice a lot of things could go wrong here, right? I could have true evidence, but if it's ordered wrong, if it's ordered haphazardly, I don't have a good argument. It could be ordered really well, but if the pieces of evidence are false, I don't have a sound argument. So, and I mean, you can look online, there are tons of resources out there for logic, tons of different ways of presenting it. This is just my way of presenting it. I try to make it as simple as possible while still getting a basic understanding of how it is that logic works and some basic logic patterns. So again, validity is going to lead to certainty. Invalid patterns are going to lead to possibility. When we're talking about a good argument, what we want is certainty. We want certainty that the defendant is guilty, for instance. We want certainty that this work of art is good, or what have you, whatever the argument is that you're presenting, right? In whatever thesis papers you're writing for English classes, right? You need to order it in such a way that it's obvious, right? The conclusion really should be obvious if you've ordered it correctly and given true pieces of information. It should be obvious, right? And kind of the same way with logic. The logical conclusion should be obvious. So a few more terms. Not that I'm a stickler on terms, but I'm introducing you to the things, so I need to introduce you to the terms as well. I at least think that most logic problems, most logical arguments, at some point along the way involve a conditional statement. A conditional statement is merely an if-then statement. If this thing, then this other thing. And then everything else kind of flows from that, right? The if portion then is called the antecedent. If you're familiar with Spanish, antes de, before. If you're familiar with old-fashioned English words like antebellum, that means the pre-Civil War period. The anteroom, the waiting room, the room that you're in before, right? The room that you're in first, before you get to the actual room. And those are going to deal with sufficient conditions. Are these conditions enough? They are. These conditions are enough. If these conditions are met, then this thing must necessarily follow. We'll see this is somewhat like cause and effect. Mathematics is built upon the structure of logic. Our thinking is patterned on the structure of logic, or perhaps it's vice versa. Difficult to tell. And we're focusing on Western philosophy, introduction to Western philosophy. So this is the introduction to Western logic. There's also Eastern logic, which is similar, but also completely different. And actually, we'll talk somewhat about that in a few weeks when we get to a particular philosopher and why Eastern logic fits better with what he's talking about than Western logic does. Western logic, also known as bivalent logic. It's true or it's false. Boom, end of story. It can't be both. It can't be neither simultaneously. It either is or it is not. It's like a light switch. It's on or it's off. The end. Even a dimmer switch, you can dim, but it's still on until the point at which, boom, you turn it off. There's on, there's off. That's bivalent logic. Very different than Eastern logic. Okay. So the then portion then is called the consequent. The consequences of these conditions being met, here's the consequences. So the first, the most basic, the most fundamental pattern, and I'm going to focus on patterns, okay? I'm focusing primarily on patterns rather than truth. So when I ask, is it a valid pattern? I'm not asking, is it a good sound argument? I'm asking specifically if it's a valid pattern. And so don't allow, this is going to sound strange, especially given what I talked about last week, don't allow truth to confuse the issue. Because here's the thing, philosophers in general, pretty lazy, okay? Pretty lazy folks. And so if we can eliminate possibilities, if we can just look at the pattern and determine valid or invalid, then that's going to save me a lot of time and effort. Because if it's an invalid pattern, I don't care about what the pieces of evidence actually are. I don't care about the truth or falsehood. And that's where the complicated part gets in. That's the sticky part. That's the messy part. And so if I can eliminate most arguments merely by looking to see if it's ordered correctly or not, then I've saved myself a lot of time and effort. If I find a valid pattern, then I can dig deeper. Then I can look at the truth or the falsehood of the pieces of evidence. Because that's the hard work, to determine whether I have a sound argument or not. So the most basic, the most fundamental pattern of argument, and some would argue pattern of thinking itself, is called modus ponens. And this one's just going to feel right. This one's going to feel natural. Okay? So I'll start with a conditional statement. If A, then B. And I'm just using A and B here as placeholders. Okay? I'm just showing the pattern itself. Then I'll go in and replace the A's and the B's with actual words, just so we can see how this thing works. Okay? If A, then B. Now, already I know that A is going to be a subset of B. Okay, if you're thinking about mathematics and so forth, domains and scopes and ranges and so forth, right? A is going to be a subset of B. I don't know how large of a subset, it sort of doesn't matter, right? If, right, again, sufficient, this is enough, if this is met, then this has to be the case. These are the consequences. Cause and effect, for instance. And I'll talk about that when I get to the example here in a second. So my first piece of evidence, my first premise, is merely this conditional statement, if A, then B. My second piece of evidence then is I'm telling you A is happening. A has occurred. A is the case. A is true. Now, without even looking at the board then, you should already be able to figure out what my conclusion is. Again, I've simplified this as much as possible. Primarily, I'm going to focus on arguments that have merely two pieces of evidence and a conclusion, and that's it. It doesn't get any simpler than that. Okay? Piece of evidence number one, if A, then B. Piece of evidence number two, A is the case. Now remember, the first piece of evidence is telling you if A happens, then that's enough, that's sufficient, that demonstrates that necessarily B is going to occur. And I've told you in the second piece of evidence, A is happening or has happened. Therefore, necessarily B. Necessarily the consequent is going to happen. That's the conclusion. Now, a couple of examples. Thinking about sets and subsets. If you're a Columbus State athlete, then you must necessarily be a Columbus State student. In order to be an athlete at Columbus State, you have to be enrolled as a student at Columbus State. Not all Columbus State students are athletes. Athletes are a subset of the larger group of Columbus State students. If you're a Columbus State athlete, then you're a Columbus State student. So this is just a visual representation of sets and subsets. I'm telling you A is a subset of B. Here's Columbus State athletes. Here's Columbus State students. My second piece of evidence, you're a Columbus State athlete. So I've now located you here. This is you in A. If you're in A, you are necessarily a part of B. If you're a part of the smaller group, you're necessarily a part of the larger group. That's what this first piece of evidence is telling you. If Columbus State athlete, then Columbus State student. You're a Columbus State athlete. Guess what? I know beyond a reasonable amount of doubt, I know with 100% certainty then, you're a Columbus State student. Boom. Now notice, I have not assessed the truth of any of this. Right? There are violations, probably not necessarily at Columbus State, but there are violations at colleges about eligibility and stuff all the time. Right? I'm not stopping to assess the truth of these statements. I'm merely saying if they are true, then this conclusion is necessarily true also. I've ordered the information properly. The evidence is in the right order. This leads to this, which leads to this. Step by step by step, walking you through the thinking process. Another example. Forget about sets and subsets. Think about cause and effect. If I let go of this dry erase marker, we all know what's going to happen, don't we? Unless I'm a magician and it'll levitate or something along those lines, we all can safely presume that if I let go, the thing is going to fall. Gravity, right? I'm not in a vacuum. Gravity is still the case. If I let go, then it will fall. I let go, ta-da, it fell. Super anticlimactic, right? Because that's what you expected to be the case. If you let go, then it falls. If Schrappe lets go, then the marker falls. What happened? Schrappe let go. Conclusion, the thing fell. No kidding. That's how cause and effect works. If the cause happens, then the effect has to. I told you then, second piece of evidence, the cause is happening or has happened. Boom, we therefore know with certainty the effect occurred as well. How about mathematics? I'm so glad you asked. If 2 plus 2, then 4. 2 plus 2, therefore 4. Ta-da! If 3 times 3, then 9. 3 times 3, therefore what do you have? You have an example of 9. Guaranteed to be the case 100% of the time, every single time. That looks really weird on screen when I do that. I shouldn't do that, I'm sorry. Every time. Now let's think about other events that may occur in life. I tell you something like, if it's raining, then I take my umbrella. And it's raining right now. What must I necessarily then do? What do you know is going to happen? I'm taking my umbrella. I told you, if it's raining, then I'm taking it. And I've told you it's raining. Therefore, I have to take it. Guaranteed. Certainty. It's ordered properly. This is a valid pattern. Advertisers use this all the time to convince you of things. Because again, not only are philosophers lazy, non-philosophers sometimes are too. And so, if I were to say something like, if the hamburger is juicy, then it's delicious. And our hamburgers are the juiciest. You already know. I don't need to tell you. I don't need to give you the conclusion. The conclusion is obvious. What's the conclusion? I'm going to presume you said it, or at least thought it. Our burgers are the most delicious. If a juicy burger defines a good burger, and ours are the juiciest, it's not just juicy, it's not just good, it's the juiciest, then it's also the best. And effective advertising does not tell you the conclusion. They don't give you the conclusion. Instead, they leave it up to you to figure out because they know that you can. They've given you all the evidence you need to figure out the conclusion. And if you figure out the conclusion, then you have some ownership of it, so you're much more willing to believe it without actually confirming whether it's true or not. And quite frankly, most advertisers aren't concerned about justified true belief. As long as they can get you to believe, then they can get you to buy, and that's all they're worried about. That's the whole point. Right? It's all based on opinion. Again, to go back to Plato, justified belief is merely opinion. That's enough for advertisers. That's enough to keep you in the cave and keep you buying stuff. If it's raining, then I take my umbrella. It's raining, therefore I take my umbrella. That's all you need to know. You have all of the evidence that you need to safely conclude that I'm taking my umbrella. Unless I'm lying, in which case that calls into question this, but not the pattern itself. The pattern is a good, solid pattern. All of logic, all of mathematics is based upon this pattern right here. The most fundamental. If, let's see. If you get this haircut, then you will be beautiful. You go get that haircut. Why do you go get the haircut? Because you know if you get the haircut, then you'll be beautiful. So you go get the haircut. And then what? You're beautiful. If you're successful, then you get red sports car. You're successful, so you get red sports car. Obviously. Again, Schrappe is not calling into question the truth. Schrappe is trying to get you to focus merely on the pattern itself. Because notice, I could put false stuff in here too, and maybe some of the stuff I already said was false. If you're a cat, then you're a dog. You're a cat, therefore what? You're a dog. Why? Sets and subsets. Not true. Cats are not the same thing as dogs, unless you listen to Ron Swanson, in which case dogs that weigh less than 10 pounds are cats, and cats are useless. If you're a cat, then you're a dog. You have an example of a cat, ta-da, you have an example of a dog. If you're Socrates, then you are bald. You are Socrates, therefore you're bald. If you're Bucephalus, then you are strong. You are Bucephalus, therefore you are strong. So many statements can be boiled down to if, then. And when you do so, it's so much easier and so much clearer to determine whether the pattern itself is valid or not. Right? If we're talking about cause and effect, are you telling me that the cause has happened? If we're talking about mathematics, right? This is the stuff on the left side of the equal sign. 2 plus 2, 3 times 3, whatever it is. Okay. So I have to erase this stuff to give myself more room for the other examples. So modus ponens I'll put back up here in the corner so we can continue to compare these other patterns to modus ponens. I'll abbreviate it MP, and I'll ditch the 1, 2, 3. Modus ponens, and this form is valid if A, then B, A, therefore B. I'm going to leave up our little visual representation here. Sets and subsets. Okay? So that's number 1. The second pattern will look extremely similar, but I assure you it is completely different. The first piece of evidence is going to be the same. I'm going to use the first piece of evidence, this conditional statement, through most of the examples in order for clarification purposes. Okay, I'm going to change as little as possible in order to make it clear. So the second one, and this one has no name, if A, then B. But here, my second piece of evidence is going to be B rather than A. Therefore A. So my second piece of evidence, notice, is the larger set, not the subset. My second piece of evidence is the effect, not the cause. That changes everything. Everything. It doesn't seem like it would. It seems like a simple change, but it affects so much. Here's why. Remember, A is still a subset of B. That's what my first piece of evidence has told you. But now the second piece of evidence has not affirmed A. Instead, it has affirmed B. So maybe it's part of the smaller set. Maybe it's just a part of the larger set. Examples: Columbus State athlete, Columbus State student. If you're a Columbus State athlete, then you're a Columbus State student. Second piece of evidence now says you're a Columbus State student. That does not necessarily mean you're a Columbus State athlete. You're a part of the larger group of Columbus State students. It does not necessarily mean that you're specifically a Columbus State athlete. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Notice the follow-up question, yes, but are you an athlete, makes sense. There's no follow-up questions here. You have all of the pieces of evidence that you need. Here, you don't have everything you need. You're still left wondering, but are you a Columbus State athlete? Because that doesn't follow necessarily. Possibly, but also possibly not. Possibly not. Mathematics. If 2 plus 2, then 4. I have an example of 4. Was it necessarily because I had 2 plus 2? No. There are literally an infinite number of ways to get to 4. 2 plus 2 is merely one of them. 2 plus 2 is merely a subset. One possibility. It's not guaranteed that's the one that was met here. It's not guaranteed that that was the condition that was met. Cause and effect. If I let go, then it will fall. Oh, it fell. Why? Because I fell too. I didn't let go. Maybe I let go. Maybe I was off screen. You don't know, right? Verification with the senses rather than with logic. We'll get to that later in the week. Right? You don't know. All you know is that the effect happened. There may be other causes. Not necessarily this one. Not necessarily because Schrappe let go. Maybe Schrappe tripped over something and fell. Therefore, if Schrappe fell, so did this. But Schrappe didn't let go. If it's raining, then I take my umbrella. I took my umbrella. That's not proof. That's not enough to prove conclusively, 100% certain it's because it was raining. Maybe I'm taking it in case it rains. Maybe I'm taking it as a fashion statement. Maybe I'm taking it because it's really, really sunny and I'm going to use it as a parasol. We don't know. We have additional questions to ask. It means it's been ordered wrong. It hasn't been ordered in such a way that the conclusion is necessarily the case. Welcome to the pattern of invalidity, or welcome to an invalid pattern. Possible. Not guaranteed. If you get this haircut, then you'll be beautiful. You're beautiful. Guaranteed you got the haircut? This will be funny for the thumbnail. If the burger is juicy, then it's delicious. Ours is delicious, therefore it's juicy? Not necessarily. There may be other conditions which lead to a delicious burger other than just juiciness. Here, those other conditions don't matter because juiciness is one of them, and that's the condition that we meet, therefore delicious. Here, if there are other things besides juiciness that lead to deliciousness, all you've told me is it's delicious. I don't know if it's juicy or not. I don't know if it's juicy or not. Invalid pattern, that's why. If cat, then dog. Dog, that's great, but I don't know if I have an example of a cat or not. So this one then is invalid. Invalid. It's going to be confusing. This one's valid. This one's invalid. Okay. The third one. And notice how this is still based on this. This just flips the conclusion and the premise. And so it's important to know and to recognize, not just for intro to philosophy, intro to logic section. I'm talking about life here. It's important to know what is the conclusion. What is the thing that whomever it is attempting to demonstrate or to prove to you? What are we trying to get to here? What's the conclusion? Are we trying to conclude the effect? Or are we trying to conclude the cause? That changes a lot. Third one then, and I mean, I've done all I can with A and B, right? Wrong. I can now deny that A and B are the case. Okay, but I'm going to start with the same first piece of evidence, the same initial premise. If A, then B. But now, we kind of have to think a little bit backwards. We're going to have to reverse engineer this thing. In order for it to be valid, I'm going to give you the valid one now. This one's valid. It's called modus tollens or modus tollens. In order for it to be valid then, the thing I have to deny is the effect. The thing I have to deny is the consequent. Why is that? I'm glad you asked. I'll show you. If A, then B, not B. Therefore, not A. Let's look at our circles. A is still a subset of B. My second piece of evidence is telling you it's not part of the larger group. It's out here. Well, it's not a part of the larger group. It can't be a part of the smaller group. Obviously, certainly. If Columbus State athlete, then Columbus State student. Not Columbus State student. I don't need to go on to ask the additional question. Yes, but are you a Columbus State athlete? I already know the answer is no. The condition was not met. If the condition had been met, then we'd have B instead of an example of not B. I really should position this better now. I'm like, my head's on and off. At least my hand's still here. So, if Columbus State athlete, then Columbus State student. Not Columbus State student. Then guess what? Also, not Columbus State athlete. If 2 plus 2, then 4. 17. What's 17? 17's not 4. So guess what I didn't have? I did not have 2 plus 2. If Schrappe lets go, if Schrappe lets go. If Schrappe lets go, then it falls. It's not falling. You know why? Because Schrappe didn't let go. If the effect doesn't happen, that is enough proof that the cause didn't either. If it's raining, then I take my umbrella. I didn't take my umbrella. Why not? Because it ain't raining. I don't need to ask, hey, is it raining outside? I already know it's not raining, because if it was raining, you'd take your umbrella. You didn't take your umbrella, so it must not be raining. If you get the haircut, then you're beautiful. You're not beautiful. So guess what? You don't have the right haircut. Again, this is not Schrappe saying this. This is marketers and ad execs telling you these things. If the burger is juicy, then it's delicious. This hamburger is garbage. So guess what? It ain't juicy. It didn't meet at least one of the conditions. We don't know about the other conditions. We don't care about the other conditions because we know the condition of juiciness was not met. And that's not what we're worried about because of the first premise. If you're successful, then you get the red sports car. You drive a green minivan. I may be talking about me here. Guess what? Not successful. Right? If red sports car is the demonstration, the outward expression of success, and you do not drive a red sports car, it's neither red nor a sports car. You're about as far away from a red sports car as possible with the green minivan. Not successful. Okay? And again, after I present these, I'll go back and give some examples. And then as part of the discussion board, then I'll give more examples so that we can continue to clarify these things, right? And this is just one portion of logic, okay? This is just deductive patterns. That's what we're talking about, deductive patterns. We're deducing through logic here, okay? The fourth one, it's probably going to show up. I'll move the fourth one over here. Okay. The fourth one, this one's going to be another invalid pattern. And you can probably guess what it's going to look like. We've only got one option left here. I've affirmed the antecedent. I've affirmed the consequent. I've denied the consequent. So what's left? Denying the antecedent. That was a whole lot of jargon that I used that I just introduced less than half an hour ago. Sorry about that. If A, then B, not A, therefore not B. It's not going to be enough, man. It's not going to be enough. It's going to give me possibility instead of necessity and certainty. We'll do our A's and B's again. A is a subset of B, as my first premise tells me, my first piece of evidence. Right? I'm telling you not A. That's great. So it's not in the subset. But does that mean it's part of the larger set? Or not? I don't know. I have additional questions here. I don't know. So if 2 plus 2, then 4, not 2 plus 2, fantastic. But do I have 4? Because again, there's an infinite number of ways to get to 4. Maybe I still have 4. Maybe I have 17. I don't know. That's why I have question marks. Because I don't know. I don't know is not where valid patterns should leave you. If it's raining, then I take my umbrella. It's not raining. Okay, but did you take your umbrella? I don't know. If the burger is juicy, then it's delicious. It's not juicy. Is it delicious? I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing the high-pitched thing, but I may as well just run with it now. If Schrappe lets go, then the thing will fall. Schrappe didn't let go. Did it fall? I don't know. Yeah, maybe Schrappe tripped or something. There may be other conditions. Just telling me that that condition wasn't met is not enough to demonstrate that the effect didn't happen. It's possible. If Columbus State athlete, then Columbus State student. Not Columbus State athlete. Okay, but are you a Columbus State student? It's still a legitimate question to ask, because you haven't covered all of the bases here. So this one, modus ponens, is the most fundamental, the most primary. These three here are really just kind of variations on this theme, right? Now the next one then, hypothetical syllogism. Okay. And so I'll show the valid pattern first. Again, it's going to start with the same initial premise, the same if A, then B. Okay. If A, then B. But here, with the hypothetical syllogisms, all of the premises and the conclusion will all be conditional statements. So my second piece of evidence will be if B, then C. Therefore, if A, then C. Okay. So again, my conditional statements are still telling me the same pieces of information here. So my first one tells me that A is a subset of B. My second piece of evidence then, since it's also a conditional, if B, then C, tells me that B is a subset of C. So obviously then, A is a subset of C, which is what my conclusion says. If you have an A, then you necessarily have a C. Yep. The important part here, in order to determine validity with regards to this type of argument, is to ensure, here's more jargon coming, that the consequent of this premise, the preceding premise, becomes the antecedent of the following premise. If A, then B. If B, then C. Okay? There has to be this link, right? It's like a chain, links in a chain, that the back link has to become the front link of the next one in order to have a proper chain. If you do paper chains or metal chains, whatever. Then, if that's the case, as long as you've linked this up, you can do this forever. You can do this as far as you want, because all you're doing is nesting. All you're doing is building more sets out. And so it'll always go back to this initial one. If A, then whatever. There were DirecTV commercials quite a few years ago now that were kind of based upon this. And again, they were valid, though they were ridiculous, because it established the pattern correctly. Right? It was if you have cable TV, then the cable will go out. If the cable goes out, then you'll start taking karate classes. If you take karate classes, then you'll think yourself an expert. If you think yourself an expert, then you'll become a vigilante. If you become a vigilante, then you'll wind up in the hospital. Therefore, if you have cable TV, you will wind up in the hospital. Ridiculous. Why? Because the premises aren't true. It's not ridiculous because it's invalid. It's a valid pattern. That's why the ridiculousness works, because you're being presented a valid pattern, so there's something about it that feels sort of true. It feels sort of legitimate, even though it's ridiculous. if anyone's seen Monty Python, The Search for the Holy Grail. As I like to say, Monty Python is dumb comedy for smart people. They all have advanced degrees. I think all of, well, except the American, of course. But the British ones all have advanced degrees. Cleese, Chapman, Idle, Palin, Jones. All of them have at least their master's degree in something. They're smart, educated folks. Rowan Atkinson, another British comedian, has his master's degree in engineering. These are smart folks. Even though the comedy may seem somewhat dumb, really it's not. So, there's a classic scene, my second favorite scene of the whole movie, of Monty Python, The Search for the Holy Grail. And if you can find it online, great. And in this scene, there's this gentleman who he's clearly the scientist of this particular village. And this is set in Arthurian times in England. And they're trying to determine whether this particular individual is a witch or not. And so, some of the criteria for being a witch, what might be, she's got a pointy nose, or she's got a wart, or whatever, right? Well, they determine it to be this. Here's how they determine if she's a witch or not. If she floats, if she weighs the same as a duck, then she will float. Okay, again, not worrying about water displacement, right? If she weighs the same as a duck, then she will float. If she floats, then she's made of wood. If she's made of wood, then she is a witch. Therefore, if she weighs the same as a duck, then she is a witch. It's valid. It's ridiculous, but it's valid. Consequence, becoming antecedents. If she's a duck, or if she weighs the same as a duck, then she is a witch. He even in the scene says, right, he walks them through this, and at the end says, so logically. Yeah, logically. Step by step, by step by step. This piece of evidence leads to the next piece of evidence, leads to the next piece of evidence, leads to this conclusion. Valid pattern. Yeah. Logically, it's true. In reality, it's not, because the premises aren't true, right? It has nothing to do with a duck's weight, which is why it floats, right? Yes, wood does float, but other things besides wood also float. So just because a person floats does not mean, does not demonstrate, does not prove that they're made of wood, right? So it falls apart. This is how Sherlock Holmes works, right? If the best example of this is the latest BBC production with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, and it's in the first episode of the first season, and the Watson character kind of doesn't know Holmes yet, and he's intrigued as to why the police would call in an amateur. And so Holmes proceeds then to give Watson all of these details about Watson's life that Watson has never voiced, based upon certain pieces of evidence combined with logic. If this, then this. If this, then this. If this, then this. If this is scratched, then that's what this means. If this, then this, then this. Watson's stunned. He's amazed. When you think and act logically, it is somewhat amazing sometimes, because many people don't, even though they are capable of, right? Let's go back to Plato for a second. Everyone's capable of understanding this stuff. Somewhat like the mathematical objects, right? Notice how conceptual this is. Yeah, I'm putting it on a board to help you to visualize it, but this is pretty conceptual stuff, pretty abstract stuff. Interesting. Now, any derivation away from this then will be an invalid pattern, right? So, for instance, if I were to say, if A, then B, if A, then C, therefore, if B, then C, I don't know, I have shared antecedents. That doesn't give me the proper causal chain. It doesn't give me the proper connection. Let's see. If it rains, then I take my umbrella. If it rains, then I must run the windshield wipers. So if I take my umbrella, then I must run the windshield wipers? That doesn't fit. That doesn't follow necessarily. Think about sets and subsets, right? I know that A is a subset of B. I know that A is a subset of C, but I don't know where to draw my C. I don't know where to put that circle. I don't know what the relationship between these two larger groups is. Furthermore, so that one's invalid. Another invalid one that looks similar. If I have shared consequence, if A then B, if C then B, therefore what? If A then C? Shared consequence doesn't tell me anything either. I don't know. Again, I don't even know how to draw my circles. I don't know what's a subset of what. I know that A is a subset of B. I know that C is a subset of B, but I don't know what the relationship between A and C is. Maybe they're the same. Maybe they overlap. Maybe they're completely different. I don't know. I don't know. So nothing you could tell me about them would prove anything, because I don't have enough information here. And there's one more pattern that I want to show you. Let me erase my floating duck here. Okay. And this one is going to be slightly different. This one's called a disjunctive syllogism. And again, there are tons of variations of these, right? There's conjunctive and you're joining these things together. But typically, you can boil an argument down to one of these 5 or 6, and then they just kind of build up on each other. The 6th one, then, the disjunctive syllogism. Go up to 6. Disjunctive syllogism. This one's not going to be a conditional statement if-then. Instead, it's going to be either or. So either A or B. But here's where it's tricky. In the world of logic, it won't say this, but this or is always inclusive, which means it's A or B, parenthetically, or both. And the rules of logic, because part of the goal of logic is to get away from language and the vagueness that comes with language, okay? And so you can see, I've already shorthanded quite a bit here, and I could shorthand even more. And that's where we get into symbolic logic, where we're merely using symbols rather than actual words and concepts. Pretty abstract. So A or B or both. And so it has to, the or in logic has to always be either inclusive all the time or exclusive all of the time. And or is inclusive enough sometimes that the rules then are that it's always inclusive, which means it could lead to some physical impossibilities, but not logical impossibilities, right? So for example, either Dr. Schrappe is at home or Dr. Schrappe is at a restaurant, or both at the same time. Physical impossibility, but not a logical impossibility. That is not illogical. In fact, it's logical that Dr. Schrappe could be both places at the same time. Sometimes the rules of logic do not match up with the rules of reality. Now, they're meant to. Logic is established to demonstrate the realities of actual existence. But given what it's doing and how it's going about it, those rules sometimes lead to physical impossibilities. This is where you get into all of the logical paradoxes. Zeno's paradox, the Eros paradox, so on and so forth. So, for instance, in order for me to get from here to the door, which is over there, probably about 6 feet to the door. In order to get the 6 feet to the door, I first have to get 3 feet. I have to get halfway to the door before I get fully to the door. In order to get there, I have to first go halfway, 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 halfway. So if I always have to first make it halfway, I never fully get there. Logically, motion doesn't happen. Now, clearly that's ridiculous. Physically, motion happens. But logically, it doesn't. Right? Logically, the tortoise can never surpass the hare for the same reasons. Logical paradoxes, such as the liar's paradox. Right? You arrive on an island that you know is full of people who lie all the time, pathological liars. And the first person you meet on this island says, "I'm a liar." Well, shoot. Now what? Because if he's lying, then that means he's not a liar. But he'd be lying about not being a liar. And if he's telling you the truth that he is a liar, shoot, he's telling me the truth instead of a lie. Logical paradoxes. They're fun, sure. And again, there are entire books about these as well. But most of them are based upon logic. It's illogical, or it's two competing logical assertions. So this is an either or, either one or the other, or both. Which means that we have a classic Venn diagram, which my littlest daughter for some reason despises. I don't know, she's weird. Right? A, alone, B, alone, or both, the intersection of the two. Which means that I have 3 options, 3 possibilities. I'm looking to get to one conclusion here, which means I need to eliminate 2 of those 3. In order to eliminate 2 of the 3, I have to deny either A or B is the case. So in order for it to be valid, let's say not A. Therefore, B alone. Why? Because look, if it's not A, not only is it not A by itself, it's also not A and B, because A can't be a part of this, which leaves me then with B by itself. Right, so let's say that the server comes to the table. I'm at a restaurant. What would you like, sir? And the options are ice cream or waffles, or both, because it's an inclusive or. And I then say to her, yes to ice cream. She's going to have a follow-up question. Wait. Okay, that's great, ice cream, I got that. But do you also want the waffle? Because you haven't eliminated enough possibilities. You've just told me I don't want waffle by itself. That'd be an invalid pattern. The invalid pattern will be affirming one or the other. A or B or both. A. Telling me A is great, but I don't know if it's A by itself or A with B. Instead, I have to deny something. I have to say, no waffles, thank you. Now the server knows, okay, ice cream by itself, got it. No follow-up question needed here. Either Schrappe's at home or he's at the restaurant, or both. He's not at home, ta-da, we know he's at the restaurant, got it. Great. Either you want to retire from coaching football and spend more time with your family, or you want to continue coaching football. You don't want to spend more time with your family, therefore you want to coach football. Bit of a dated reference now. Here in Columbus, Ohio, at least, Ohio State football is huge. It's massive, in case you haven't noticed. Many houses have Buckeye rooms devoted to the worship of Ohio State football. And yes, I use the word worship intentionally there. For more on that story, take my world religions class sometime, or comparative religions class, I guess it is now. And we'll talk about whether Ohio State football is a religion. Schrappe contends that it is. So, and when Urban Meyer, who's a very successful college football head coach, was hired by Ohio State to coach their football team, if you don't believe me that football is a religion here, as it is other places as well, but it is here too. The cover of the Ohio State newspaper showed Urban Meyer at the end of a journey with football players marching between parted waters. Urban Meyer was going to lead them to the promised land, very religious language here. But anyway, I digress. He'd retired previously, twice actually. He'd retired from coaching football because he wanted to spend more time with his family. He was retired for a year and then accepted the Ohio State football coaching position. This is why I'm not in the press, because my question would have been to him, what did your family do to upset you so much you no longer want to spend more time with them? But I'm also a little bit of a smart aleck and jerk. But anyway. Either A or B or both. Waffles or ice cream or both, which, by the way, they are delicious together. You should have both, right? French fries or applesauce or both. Now, this is weird for us to wrap our heads around because especially in restaurant settings where when we see the word or, we typically think we can have one, but that's at the exclusion of the other, and it's the exact opposite in the world of logic. In the world of logic, you can have both. You can both enjoy eating the cake and still have some of the cake left over as well. Have your cake and eat it too. Which, that's what that phrase is about. It gets misused all the time. But anyway. Either A or B or both, which means you have to deny one of the two options. I don't want that, which then leaves the other thing all by itself. By telling me you want something, yes, I would like to have that, doesn't tell me anything about the other option. Okay. So, yeah. All right, that's enough for this one. Bye.